The Galaxia dreadnought was a fortress of gleaming metal and power, its shields humming with the impenetrable energy that had made the Duraxis Empire feared across the galaxy. Captain Varus stood on the bridge, watching the stars drift by on the view screen. He'd seen countless battles, led countless victories. His fleet had conquered worlds, silenced rebellions, and crushed opposition. Today was supposed to be no different. The humans had crossed into Duraxian territory, and Varus was sent to teach them a lesson. "Captain," the tactical officer called out, breaking his thoughts. "The human fleet is approaching. 15 ships, lightly armed by our standards." Varus smirked. "Lightly armed, but bold. Let's show them the power of Duraxis. Ready the cannons?" The officer hesitated, glancing nervously at his console. "They've sent a transmission, sir. Their commander is requesting to speak with you." Varus chuckled. "Of course they are. They think diplomacy will save them." He gestured to the comms officer. "Patch them through." The screen flickered to life, revealing a human commander, young, sharp-eyed, and confident. "Commander Reeve." According to the report, the humans had always had spirit, but Varus knew they were no match for Duraxian might. "Captain Varus," Reeve began, his tone calm and collected, "I suggest we avoid unnecessary conflict today. You're on the edge of Duraxis space, and we've come for a peaceful resolution." Varus raised an eyebrow. "A peaceful resolution? Your ships are outgunned, outnumbered, and your shields are no match for ours. What could you possibly offer in return for peace?" Reeve smiled faintly. "You're right. Captain, you've got us beaten numbers and weapons, but what you don't realize is that we're not relying on brute force today." Varus leaned forward, intrigued. "Oh? And what are you relying on, Commander? Diplomacy? Surrender?" Reeve shook his head, his smile growing just a little. "No, Captain. Something you've never seen before." The transmission cut off, leaving Varus staring at the blank screen. He stood up, his eyes narrowing. Something felt wrong. The humans were brash, sure, but they weren't foolish enough to march into battle against a fleet like this without a plan. "Tactical. Scan their ships. I want a full report on any unusual energy signatures." The officer tapped furiously at his console, his face paling as the data rolled in. "Sir, I don't know how to explain this, but their ships are emitting unusual readings. No known weapon signatures. No heavy cannons. It's something else." Varus's brow furrowed. "Something else? Explain." "I don't know. Sir, it's like they're charging something, but it's not registering as any weapon or shield we've encountered before." Varus's gut tightened. For the first time in years, a sliver of doubt crept into his mind. The Duraxis fleet had never been challenged, never been outsmarted, but the way Commander Reeve had spoken, it wasn't bravado. He had been calm, confident, like a man holding a card that Varus couldn't see. "Prepare all defenses," Varus ordered, his voice sharp. "I don't care what they're doing. If they make one wrong move, we'll annihilate them." The Duraxis fleet hovered in space, an armada of unstoppable power. Varus's confidence was shaken but not broken. These humans were playing some kind of game, but they would soon realize that Duraxis was not to be trifled with. But then, something happened that changed everything. Without warning, the human fleet unleashed a barrage of small, spherical objects, hundreds of them, racing toward the Duraxis ships at incredible speed. They weren't missiles. They weren't energy blasts. They were something else entirely. "Incoming," the tactical officer shouted, his hands flying over the controls. "Shields at maximum." The first wave of spheres hit the Duraxis fleet, and for a moment, nothing happened. Varus was about to order a counterattack when the unthinkable occurred. The shields of the Duraxis ships blinked, flickered, and then vanished entirely. "What? What is happening?" Varus roared, his voice filled with disbelief. "Where are our shields?" The officer's hands trembled over the controls. "Sir, the shields are gone, completely neutralized, those drones. They've taken down our entire defense grid." Varus's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't possible. The Duraxis shields were impenetrable, built on technology no other species had come close to matching, and yet, the humans had just dismantled them as if they were nothing. How? Virus whispered, his mind racing. How did they do this? Before he could process the enormity of the situation, the human fleet moved in, their weapons systems lighting up. Virus's ships, now defenseless, were sitting ducks. The first volley of human fire tore through the hull of the nearest Diraxis cruiser, reducing it to a burning wreck in seconds. "Return fire!" Virus bellowed, his voice cracking with desperation. "Take them down!" But it was no use. The humans were already moving in for the kill, their ships weaving through the disoriented Diraxis fleet like predators hunting their prey. One by one, the mighty vessels of the Diraxis Empire were obliterated, their defenses useless against the strange new human technology. Varus watched in horror as his fleet, the pride of the Empire, was reduced to debris, floating helplessly in the void of space. His mind reeled with shock and fury. How had this happened? How had the humans, a species they had dismissed as weak, developed something so devastating? The comms officer's voice broke through the chaos, barely audible. "Captain, we've lost everything." Vera sank into his chair, his chest heaving with disbelief. This couldn't be real. The Diraxis Empire was invincible. They were the strongest force in the galaxy. And yet, in the span of minutes, they had been utterly defeated. "Humans," Varus muttered, his voice filled with bitter awe. "How did we never see this coming?" The answer, he realized too late, was simple. The Diraxis Empire had grown arrogant, complacent. They had underestimated the one species that had always thrived on defying the odds. Humans were survivors, and today, they had proven it once again. Captain Varus sat motionless, his mind racing as the once mighty Diraxis fleet lay in ruins before him. The wreckage of ships floated in the void, twisted metal and debris marking the graveyard of Diraxis superiority. His crew scrambled at their stations, desperately trying to regain control of what remained. But it was clear to Varus the battle was over, and they had lost. Badly. A beep from the comms console interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, we're receiving another transmission from the humans," the comms officer said, his voice barely steady. Varus swallowed his pride, the bitterness of defeat still fresh in his throat. "Put it through." The screen flickered, and once again, Commander Reeve appeared, his face calm, almost sympathetic. This time, the smugness Virus had expected wasn't there. Instead, Reeve looked at him with a kind of somber acknowledgement. The silence hung in the air for a moment, as if Reeve were waiting for Varus to speak first. "You've won," Varus said through gritted teeth. "Congratulations. But don't think for a second this means humans are superior. We'll learn from this. And when we come back, you won't be so lucky." Reeve's expression remained unchanged. "I didn't come to gloat, Captain Varus. You know as well as I do that war doesn't end with a single battle. But this could be the beginning of something different." Varus blinked, surprised by the shift in tone. "Different?" he scoffed, forcing a laugh. "What? Are you here to offer terms of surrender? You think the Diraxis Empire will bow to a handful of lucky humans?" Reeve leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp. "I don't want you to surrender. I want you to listen." Varus's mouth twisted into a sneer. "I'm listening. You asked me earlier how we did it," Reeve began, his tone calm but firm. "How we took down your shields." Varus said nothing, but he was certainly paying attention. Reeve continued. "The shield breakers, those drones we deployed, they're a new piece of tech we've been developing for years. You see, while the Diraxis Empire has been focused on strengthening defenses, fortifying your impenetrable shields, we've been studying one thing: weakness." Varus raised an eyebrow. His interest piqued despite himself. "Weakness?" "Yes," Reeve said. "No defense is perfect, Captain. No shield can be invulnerable forever. Our shield breakers don't just attack your defenses, they analyze them, find the exact frequency, the molecular structure, the weak point that no one else sees, and they exploit it." Varus sat back, stunned. He had spent his entire career believing that the Diraxis shields were flawless, the Empire untouchable, and now, here was a human commander casually explaining how they had dismantled everything he knew. "You expect me to believe that you've built the perfect weapon," Varus said, though he already knew it was true. Reeve shook his head. "It's not perfect. Far from it. But it's a start, and here's where things get interesting. Varys narrowed his eyes. Go on. We've cracked the code. Captain, we've found the weakness in the strongest defense in the galaxy. But we're not here to conquer. We're here to survive. Just like you. And that's why I'm offering you an alliance. Varys's jaw tightened. An alliance? After you've destroyed my fleet? After you've humiliated the Duraxis Empire? I'm not offering an alliance because we're stronger than you, Reeves said firmly. I'm offering it because we both know the galaxy is far more dangerous than either of us can handle alone. There are things out there, forces neither of us are prepared for. And the truth is, we need each other. Varys stood, his fists clenched. The Duraxis Empire doesn't need anyone. We've conquered more worlds than you've ever seen. Reeves' gaze was steady, unwavering. And yet, here we are. The silence that followed was heavy, charged with the weight of history. Varys knew that Reeves was right. The Duraxis Empire had always believed in its own superiority. But the truth was, they had grown complacent. They had focused so much on being untouchable that they had never considered what would happen if someone found a way to break through. Varys looked around the bridge at his remaining officers. All of them exhausted, defeated. He could sense their fear, their uncertainty. They had never faced anything like this before. Why should I trust you? Varys asked finally. His voice low, Reeves' expression softened just slightly. Because if we keep fighting, we'll destroy each other. But if we work together, we might just survive what's coming. Varys stared at the screen, torn between pride and pragmatism. The Duraxis Empire had never formed alliances. They had never needed to. But something in Reeves' words rang true. The galaxy was vast, and there were enemies out there far more dangerous than humans. Varys let out a slow breath. What exactly are you proposing? Commander? Reeves leaned back, a small glint of hope in his eyes. A temporary alliance. To begin with, we share technology. We help each other defend against mutual threats. And in time, who knows? Varys looked away, staring at the wreckage of his fleet, his empire's pride, now floating in the void. The decision weighed heavily on him, but he knew what had to be done. Very well, Commander Reeve, Varys said, his voice cold but resigned. We'll discuss terms. Reeve smiled slightly, nodding. That's all I ask. As the transmission ended, Varys slumped into his chair, his mind reeling. This was not the outcome he had expected, not the victory he had planned for, but perhaps it was the beginning of something else, something greater than conquest. Captain Varys paced the command deck of the Galaxia dreadnought, his thoughts swirling with frustration and unease. The idea of an alliance with humans went against everything he had been taught, everything the Duraxis Empire stood for. And yet, Commander Reeves' words lingered in his mind. He paused by the view screen, staring out into the expanse of space. The human fleet hovered nearby, smaller, less advanced but still powerful. Varys clenched his fists. How had they done it? How had they dismantled the Duraxis shield so effortlessly? And more importantly, why hadn't the Duraxis Empire seen it coming? The comms officer interrupted his thoughts. Captain, Commander Reeve is requesting to board the Galaxia dreadnought for further negotiations. Varys's jaw tightened. The very idea of allowing a human onto his ship was infuriating. But this was no longer about pride, it was about survival. And if Reeve had technology that could help the Duraxis Empire recover from this defeat, Varys couldn't afford to let his emotions get in the way. Grant him permission, Varys said sharply. Prepare the negotiation chamber. A few moments later, the human shuttle docked with the dreadnought. Varys stood in the docking bay, his officers flanking him as Commander Reeve and his entourage stepped aboard. Reeve's face was calm, composed, as if he hadn't just defeated one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. Captain Varys, Reeve greeted, offering a slight nod. Thank you for agreeing to this meeting. Varys crossed his arms, his expression cold. Let's get one thing clear. Commander, this is not a surrender. The Duraxis Empire does not bow to anyone. Reeve smiled faintly. I never said it was a surrender. Captain, it's an opportunity. Varys gestured for Reeve to follow him as they walked toward the negotiation chamber. The tension between the two leaders was palpable, but Reeve remained calm, unfazed by the hostility radiating from Varys. As they entered the chamber, Varys took his seat at the head of the table, while Reeve sat across from him. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with the weight of history. Varys's officers stood nearby, their eyes fixed on the human commander, ready to intervene if necessary. "Let's be clear. Commander," Varys began, his voice sharp. "You may have won this battle, but the Daraxis Empire is not defeated. We will rebuild. We will strengthen our defenses. And next time, you won't be so lucky." Reeve nodded, as if he had expected the outburst. "I understand your position, Captain, and I don't doubt that your empire will recover. But I'm not here to gloat or provoke you. I'm here to offer something more valuable than victory. I'm offering you a chance to be part of something bigger." Varys raised an eyebrow. "Bigger? What could possibly be bigger than the Daraxis Empire?" Reeve leaned forward slightly, his expression serious. "The galaxy is changing. Captain, the Daraxis Empire isn't the only power out there anymore. You've seen what we can do, what humans are capable of, but we're not the only ones. There are forces beyond both of our understanding. Ancient civilizations, advanced species with technologies far more powerful than either of us, and they're watching." Varys frowned, his skepticism growing. "Watching? What are you talking about?" "There's a reason we developed the shield breakers," Reeve said, his tone calm but urgent. "It wasn't just to fight the Daraxis Empire. It was to protect ourselves from something far worse, something that's been lurking in the shadows for millennia." Varys's eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe that there's some ancient threat out there, waiting to attack us?" Reeve met his gaze evenly. "Believe what you want, Captain, but I've seen the data. I've seen the signs. The Daraxis Empire isn't invincible. The shield breakers were just the beginning. There are far more dangerous weapons out there, ones that could destroy entire civilizations in the blink of an eye. And if we don't work together, we won't stand a chance." Varys sat back in his chair, his mind racing. He didn't trust Reeve. The human had humiliated him, dismantled his fleet, and now he was talking about some vague, unseen threat. But at the same time, Varys couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that there was truth in Reeve's words. The galaxy was vast, full of mysteries and dangers that even the Daraxis Empire didn't fully understand. For a long moment, the room was silent, the weight of the decision pressing down on Varys. He could reject Reeve's offer, rebuild his fleet, and seek revenge. But where would that lead? Another war, more destruction, and possibly defeat. Or he could take the risk. He could accept the alliance and see what this new partnership might bring. It went against everything he believed. But the galaxy was changing, and the Daraxis Empire had to change with it. Varys leaned forward, locking eyes with Reeve. "Let's say I believe you. Let's say there is some ancient threat out there. What's your plan? How do we stop it?" Reeve smiled slightly, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "We share our technology. We learn from each other. The humans have developed shield breakers, but the Daraxis Empire has knowledge we could never hope to replicate. Together, we could create something far more powerful than anything either of us has ever seen." Varys considered this. The thought of sharing Daraxis technology with humans was unsettling, but at the same time, the potential was undeniable. If the humans had found a way to break their shields, then perhaps, together, they could find a way to protect themselves from whatever was coming. "Fine," Varys said finally, his voice low but firm. "We'll work together. But make no mistake. Commander Reeve, this is not a partnership of equals. The Daraxis Empire leads, and you follow." Reeve's smile didn't falter. "Agreed, Captain. For now." As Reeve and his team departed the Galaxia dreadnought, Varys stood by the view screen, watching the human shuttle disappear into the blackness of space. He still didn't fully trust Reeve, but for the first time, he felt a strange sense of hope. Perhaps this alliance would lead to something greater. Perhaps, together, they could face whatever was lurking in the shadows of the galaxy. But deep in his gut, Varys knew that this was only the beginning. The galaxy was full of secrets, secrets that were starting to unravel. And soon, both humans and Daraxians would have to confront a danger far beyond anything they had ever imagined. The alliance between humans and Daraxians was fragile, but it held for now. Captain Varys. still uneasy about trusting the humans, couldn't shake the feeling that something much larger was at play. The Duraxis Empire, once unrivaled, was now grappling with the knowledge that it had been surpassed, not in brute strength, but in ingenuity. The shield breakers had shown Virus how vulnerable his people had become. But it wasn't just the humans that concerned him anymore. It was the shadowy forces Commander Reeve had hinted at, the ancient threats lurking in the void. Varys stood in the observation deck of the Galaxia Dreadnought, staring out at the stars. The human fleet hung nearby, silent and still. It had been 2 weeks since the humans' devastating attack. And yet, the galaxy remained quiet. Too quiet. Varys knew something was coming. And he wasn't the only one. "Captain," a voice called from behind him. Varys turned to see his second-in-command, Lieutenant Aerolus, standing at attention. "Commander Reeve is requesting another meeting. He says it's urgent." Varys's jaw clenched. He didn't like how frequently Reeve had been contacting him. The human commander was too eager, too calm. It put Varys on edge. But the Duraxis Empire couldn't afford to be cautious now. They needed to be prepared for whatever was coming. "Bring him to the war room," Varys ordered. The war room was a stark, metallic chamber deep within the dreadnought, lit only by the holographic display of the surrounding star systems. Varys stood at the head of the table, waiting as Reeve and 2 of his officers entered. Reeve wasted no time with pleasantries. "We've picked up a signal," Reeve began, his voice steady. "It's coming from the outer reaches of the Solvan Nebula. It's faint, but it's not natural. We believe it's a distress call." Varys frowned. "A distress call? From whom?" Reeve exchanged a glance with one of his officers, a woman with short, silver hair who stepped forward to speak. "We can't be sure, Captain Varys, but the signal matches patterns we've seen before. Ancient patterns." Varys raised an eyebrow. "Ancient? You're talking about the threat you mentioned before, aren't you?" Reeve nodded. "Yes, we believe this signal may be connected to the same forces we've been tracking for years. If it is, then we need to investigate it immediately. Whatever's out there, it's waking up." Varys's mind raced. This was what he had feared, an unknown enemy, lurking in the darkness. But now, with the Duraxis fleet weakened and the humans as their only allies, he had no choice but to trust Reeve's judgment. "What do you propose?" Varys asked, his voice sharp. Reeve stepped forward, activating the holographic display in the center of the table. A map of the Solvan Nebula appeared, dotted with stars and swirling gases. "We need to take a joint task force into the nebula," Reeve said. "Humans and Duraxians, working together. We'll follow the signal, see what's out there." And what?" Varys interrupted. "What if we find something we can't fight? What if this ancient enemy is stronger than anything we've ever faced?" Reeve met Varys's gaze, his expression unreadable. "Then we'll have to be smarter than we've ever been." Varys stared at the map, his chest tight with apprehension. This was a dangerous mission, one that could lead to disaster. But if they ignored the signal, they might be walking into an even greater threat without realizing it. "Fine," Varys said after a long pause. "We'll send a task force. But understand this, Commander, if this is a trap, if you're leading us into something we can't survive, I will make sure the Duraxis Empire survives, even if it means cutting ties with your people." Reeve nodded. "Understood, Captain, but I don't think this is a trap. I think this is the beginning of something bigger." The Duraxian and human ships moved into the nebula, their engines humming softly as they entered the swirling clouds of gas and dust. The Solvan Nebula was a dangerous place, filled with magnetic storms, rogue asteroids, and spatial anomalies. But the task force pressed on, following the faint distress signal deeper into the unknown. Varys stood on the bridge of the Galaxia Dreadnought, his eyes fixed on the viewscreen. The nebula surrounded them, its vibrant colors glowing like a cosmic storm. The human ships flanked the Duraxis fleet, their movements precise and calculated. Varys hated relying on them, but he had to admit they were good. Too good. "Captain, we're nearing the source of the signal," Lieutenant Aerolus reported, her voice tense. "Prepare for anything," Varys ordered. "I want all weapon systems online. Shields at maximum." The ship rumbled as the fleet approached the signal's origin point. And then, suddenly, the nebula cleared, revealing a massive structure floating in the void. Varys's eyes widened. The structure was ancient, far older than anything he had ever seen. It was enormous, made of dark, metallic material that shimmered in the faint starlight. Symbols and glyphs covered its surface, glowing with a strange, otherworldly energy. "What in the stars is that?" Aerolus whispered, her voice filled with awe. Reeves' face appeared on the comm screen. "Captain Varys, that structure. It matches descriptions we've found in ancient human records. It's a tomb." Varys turned to face the screen, his brow furrowed. "A tomb?" Reeve nodded grimly. "An ancient race known as the Sylvar. They were one of the first civilizations in the galaxy, far more advanced than anything we've ever seen. And according to legend, they built these tombs to contain something." Varys felt a chill run down his spine. "Contain what?" Reeve hesitated before answering. "A weapon. A weapon capable of wiping out entire star systems. We don't know what it looks like, or how it works. But if this tomb is opening, it means the Sylvar weapon is waking up." Varys's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The ancient threat Reeve had been warning him about. And they had walked right into it. "Send a recon team," Varys ordered, his voice tense. "We need to know what we're dealing with." Minutes later, a small group of human and Duraxian soldiers landed on the surface of the ancient tomb. Varys watched the mission feed from the bridge, his eyes glued to the view screen. The soldiers moved cautiously through the dark corridors, their lights casting long shadows on the walls. "This place is massive," one of the Duraxian soldiers reported, his voice echoing through the comms. "We're seeing more of those symbols, glowing, just like the ones outside." The recon team moved deeper into the tomb, their weapons at the ready, but as they rounded a corner, the feed suddenly cut out. Varys's heart skipped a beat. "What happened?" "We've lost contact with the recon team," Aerolus said, her voice tight with fear. Varys's hands clenched into fists. "Get them back. Now." But before anyone could respond, the entire ship shook violently. The view screen flickered, and then the tomb began to glow with a blinding light. Alarms blared across the bridge as the energy from the tomb surged outward, engulfing the fleet. "Shields are failing," Aerolus shouted. "We're being pulled in." Varys grabbed the command console, his mind racing. They had underestimated the power of this ancient tomb, and now they were paying the price. "Commander Reeve!" Varys barked over the comms. "What's happening?" Reeve's face appeared on the screen, his expression grim. "The weapon. It's activating."